the first, like one of the, I don't know if they are the progenitors or the parents of the progenitors of like the Hawaiian race and stuff like that. So I think that was just a point to understand the connectivity of the people to this place. Um, Specifically speaking, and zooming out a little bit more, the Hawaiian life cycle generally will follow the path of the sun. And so in the east, as you'll see, are some of the most like active areas. Some of them are like young, signifying like the beginning of life and stuff. And as we transition up to the northwest, basically following the life cycle, aging, and then finally returning to the other side, basically. So for all of our viewers out there, we are on the other side. The threshold for that area is going to be just about right past the islands of Ka'ula, up by Nihoa, and actually right on Mokumanomana as it falls on the Tropic of Cancer, what would be called Kealapolihiwa Akane, which is the physical limit of the sun. So it's literally, the sun literally doesn't go past there. So light ends at that area. So light is going to be the realm of Ao, A-O, and then anything after that is going to be the realm of Po, P-O, with a kahako over the O. And Po is basically one of those, one is a place where the gods and our ancestors reside too. So it is also the source from where we come from, as is seen in the one of our longer genealogical and cosmogonic chants, the Kumulipo. It's about 2,000 lines long, and is actually served as a means for one of our ali'i or our great chiefs to be able to directly identify his lineage and therefore his right to rule. That comes all the way from the time of the gods through like the times of actually Papahanaumokuakea longer throughout, and then all the way down to people, or like the chiefly lineages, if you will. So Papahanaumokuakea in the native Hawaiian perspective is a very sacred place in that it is our literal connection to the realm of our ancestors and our gods, and then like the source of creation, if you will. Yeah, sorry, still a little early. The coffee has not set in yet, but that's the general sense.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Wow.
In this region, the Papahanaumokuakea Marine National Monument extends out roughly 200 nautical miles from around the northwestern Hawaiian Islands in these areas that Kalamehu was referencing. And this region, this monument, is just recently, about a week ago, was announced that they're considering a partial sanctuary status designation. And so the public is welcome to participate and provide comments about that consideration of whether sanctuary status is a worthy goal. So anybody can check that out by going to papahanaumokuakea.gov. If you are not familiar with spelling that, one easy way to find it is go to the Nautilus Live webpage, where you might be already streaming the footage right now. And there are several links to the monument through the Nautilus Live page about this expedition. So you can find the spelling, Papahanaumokuakea, and through that, go to papahanaumokuakea.gov to see about the history of the monument status and this consideration for designation as a sanctuary. And links to provide your comment, which is welcomed in both Alelo Hawaii as well as in English. Encourage you to participate.
Yeah, and you might be asking why, if it's already designated as a monument, why change that to a sanctuary status? And there's a lot of possible reasons for that. One of them being that the sanctuary status is a little bit tougher to recall in the future, depending on the climate of particular political affiliations. And so any kind of additional sanctuary status would not roll back any protections that currently exist. It would only add and strengthen those. So if you've been following on our dives, you can see that the beauty and biocultural resources of the monument are not exclusive to the islands and the atolls. It extends much further down thousands of meters, and we're excited to be seeing the abundance of life and diversity of life at the depths, and would love to see these protected in memoriam.
Yeah, and speaking of diversity, we were talking on last night's dive about how many different coral species we think we saw on some of our dives, and I would at least a dozen, not more.
We
yeah.
even saw some new ones
Couple
last
dozen.
night.
Yeah, a couple dozen, just coral species, as well as a great diversity of sponges. And so that's part of the motivation for this expedition, is to understand that diversity, deep sea diversity, and the depth ranges of some of these species, as well as to document potential new species or new associations, because the deep sea realm of the monument and the sacred area is relatively unexplored. Speaking of our expedition, if you're on the Nautilus Live page, learning about our expedition, you will see that every expedition that's happening in the monument over these 6 months or so is given a name in Olelo, Hawaii, and these names connect together so that a story can be told about the work that is done in this space, and how that work builds on each other and connects to the Native Hawaiian culture.
Yeah, and just to sort of expand on that point for the viewers out there. Thank you, Beth.
Yeah.
So the names for the expeditions were a product of various meetings between OET and the Cultural Working Group, the Native Hawaiian Cultural Working Group, as well as some members of a subcommittee within the CWG, which is the nomenclature hui. So their responsibility is to sort of devise culturally appropriate names, or to come up with culturally appropriate names for some of the species, everything from places within the monument to some of the species that are directly related to these areas. And so the name that was the expedition theme that was decided was Lu'ua'ea, as everyone will see in the expedition name. So Lu'u means to dive, A'ea means to come back up for air. And so that was basically just talking about what we're literally doing with the ROVs, is we're diving and coming back up, diving and coming back up, as a means to collect some of the information about what's to be found down there in the depths. Ahiki'i is basically to arrive at a certain point. Yeah, so the name of the first expedition was Lu'a'ea Ahiki Kalipo Lipo, and so the Lipo Lipo is basically the dark depths, referring. So in a sense, right, we're going into the quote unquote dark, if you will, sort of with not much contemporary knowledge on the seafloor, what's going on. And so I think that was an opportunity to start mapping, to give us a sense of place and to where we might be working in this leading up to this expedition, which is Lu'a'ea Ahiki Kapapaku, which basically means to be diving and rising back up. But more specifically, now we're looking at the seafloor. So we come from just general darkness to now we have a sense of where we're at on the seafloor, looking at these seamounts and stuff like that. And then the final expedition is actually going to be Lu'a'ea Ahiki Ke Kualono Kai, or Kualono, and Kualono is basically a specific term for like ridges and stuff. And so now we've started in darkness, gotten a general sense of what we're looking around on the seafloor, and then maybe focusing our efforts and intentions on exploring specific regions of the seamounts. So just a little bit of information on the names.
I've been really struck with the overall expedition name, which I believe is Lu'ua'ea Ahiki Ika Waikoa. Is that right?
Ika.
So that we go down and up, or Lu'ua'ea Ahiki Ika Waikoa. We go up and down until we get to where we're going.
Oh yeah.
It's a riddle, right? And so there is actually an answer to that.
So one of the members of the group actually found a newspaper article in the Hawaiian newspapers that referred to a submarine that was visiting Hawaii. And so the Lu'ua'ea portion comes from, which would basically, well, I don't know if it's an epithet or like a wise saying. This one isn't necessarily a riddle so much as it's a sort of like it's like a poetical saying. So it involves a lot of like cultural contextual like language in there. So despite despite his, so even if it's like a very simple saying, like the amount of like place-based knowledge that was held within is super cool. It was Lu'a Ea Ahiki Waikoloa. Waikoloa is a place on the leeward side of the big island of Hawaii, but if you break down the word, it actually means like waters that could be found or that are, trying to think, sorry, I'm trying to translate right now on the fly a little bit. Well, okay, so wai is basically water, right? Ko is to come to fruition at some point, or to be achieved or to happen, and then loa is attached to ko, right? And so loa means like a long ways or like in a great capacity. And so they were talking about the submarine going across the ocean and actually reaching someplace like Australia. So it's Lu'a sort of talking about the movement of the sub, right? Going up and coming down, going up and coming down until reaching a place that was far, far away. So although we're not necessarily going to Waikoloa, or we didn't want to necessarily incite that place name specifically, we decided to incorporate just the general progression of the expedition at that point.
My understanding too is that there's like a double meaning there or the image of like a sewing machine, right? That going up and down
Oh yeah.
actually stitches together.
Oh.
And gets you into a...
Yeah. Oh, well, yeah. Like that movement you're talking about, yeah.
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 Lots of layers.
Mm-hmm.
The one that, well, it was funny when it came up, I thought about it as something that's super simple, but there's like another iteration of the Lu'ua'ea sort of thing. And so it's Lu'ua'ea Po'ohina. And Po'ohina basically means, well, Po'o is head and then Hina is gray. But it actually talks about like the way you eat poi and stuff. And so your fingers will dip into the bowl and come back up. Dip into the bowl and come back up and like eating and stuff like that. And when it comes up, because of maybe the color of the poi, it's like Po'ohina and stuff. So it's like, yeah, a lot of various meanings, but it's pretty cool how language refers indirectly to some other things. You know, there's a little bit of veiled meaning, so you be able to interpret beyond just whatever is presented at that point. So it's kind of cool. So I think that same thing applies, like you were saying, Lindsay, to our general like movement, not only physically, but also moving towards the intended goal of gathering more information and possibly more research outcomes from these dives and stuff.
Mahalo. You'd never know. You haven't finished all your coffee yet.
Right. I think the worst part is I did finish the coffee, so
just hasn't
kicked in,
seeped in yet.
Yeah.
We're thinking that it might be the cleaning job if you don't use certain types of cloth fibers.
Can you say that again, Jess?
Oh,
I
sorry.
think they're talking about the camera.
Oh yeah, we're just saying the camera might be a little bit dirty.
Is that the blurring we're seeing a little bit around the colors?
Yeah, that's what we're thinking.
Oh yeah.
A viewer suggests that other viewers should post screenshots of the expedition while you're watching. That will only help in educating people as to why this sacred space should be given more protection. Hashtag #EVNautilus, hashtag Nautilus Live, but also encourage hashtag inspired by Nautilus Live. That's one of our hashtags. Thanks for suggesting that.
Yeah, as well as maybe PMNM for the Papahanaumokuakea Marine National Monument, which is maybe a long hashtag if you want to put the full name, for connecting to this space.
Yeah, thank you.
And again, for those who are interested in learning more about the monument and the connection or the involvement of the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, Cultural Working Group, there's plenty of websites to jump in. So papahanaumokuakea.gov, the Office of Hawaiian Affairs website as well has a section on Papahanaumokuakea. Lots of great videos, educational resources, links to their social media. So definitely check those out and learn more about this really unique place, both in a biological sense, in a cultural sense, in a oceanographic setting as a Pacific Island chain.
Yeah, and then also I'm looking at the OHA site right now. There are a series of webinars and some publications that came out from the Office of Foreign Affairs. One specifically is going to be Mai Kapomai, a Native Hawaiian guidance document for the management of Papahanaumokuakea Marine National Monument. This document comes as a product of over 10 years of conversations with Native Hawaiian communities, practitioners of all levels, as well as other stakeholders within the monument. And so that might be a good reading assignment for the rest of our blue water until we reach the floor.
Yeah. And it's nicely timely also for considering the possible sanctuary designation in terms of thinking about the co-management of this place.
Yes. I think that's one of the most unique things about Papahanaumokuakea is that the way that the cultural narrative and like all of the cultural knowledge is placed at the same level as any sort of other disciplines and stuff like that. So like the sciences, and so if there are any other sort of like indigenous scholars, communities that are looking at possible ways to be able to incorporate this type of language into our work or your work, I would definitely recommend taking a look at these things as a way to advocate for the importance of our cultural heritage and knowledge in these types of spaces. And so if you can too, if you're going to provide comment, I would definitely provide comments for the sanctuary designation. I would definitely recommend looking at these publications just to familiarize yourselves a little bit more about just that cultural narrative and to sort of be able to boost that. Because I mean, if we're going to move all of these certain designations forward, we should be able to do so with not only the scientific and management understanding, but also the cultural understanding as well, so that we can properly acknowledge our relationship to these places as well as the overall value of these areas. And actually maybe find ways for other cultures as well to sort of negotiate that space and conversation in their own areas. So, yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of engaged conversation going on now about management of protected spaces and involvement of local communities, indigenous communities in the management and protection and conservation. And the Papahanaumokuakea can be, it's definitely a leader in thinking about those things.
So we have a question here. I can maybe take a first stab at, but I might need assistance. But who decides whether or not the Marine National Monument is designated as a sanctuary? What is the process? Thank you so much. Yeah, my understanding right now is that right now it's a consideration that has been, or it's a suggestion for consideration. So it's very casual. There's no push in any direction, but it is a co-consideration by the trustees of the monument. So it will go out. Comments will be solicited. If it looks like it will move forward, then it will be actually recommended for designation, which is the next step, which could happen sometime next year, assuming everything is amenable. And at that point, I believe it would go to Congress to have a vote. If Andy Collins is listening in, feel free to tune in from the lounge.
Yeah, or if our audience member can stick around until the shift that'll be from 4 p.m. to 8 p.m. Hawaii time. Andy Collins will be on shift then and can definitely chime in with more experience and knowledge about this process and all the steps involved, as well as if you go to the Papahanaumokuakea.gov website to read about the possible designation and explains kind of that process.
And the designate, from what I understand, the designation is actually part of a multifaceted approach towards drafting up the new long range monument management plan. And so the first foundational monument plan was published in 2008, and then so I think there's a lot of research and a lot of reflection on some of the other expeditions that have happened, from scientific expeditions to cultural practitioner accesses. And so by incorporating climate change assessments, the previous sanctuary plan, the Maikopomai to represent the Native Hawaiian voice, and other documents and data, as well as this designation, that'll be incorporated, like you said, Lindsay, as a proposal for the sanctuary stuff in the new management plan moving forward. And that I just got that information off of the sanctuary designation page under the management plan tab. So Andy Collins, paging Andy Collins.
Yeah, and I think it's important to acknowledge that the space has been protected by the Hawaiian people since time immemorial, and that will not end. That will continue, of course. This is really kind of, the United States Western way of protecting, and up until this point, it's mostly been designated through executive orders to both designate it as a sanctuary during the Bush era and then extend to the EEZ zone during the Obama era. So with those executive orders, it's just a slightly different process that could be potentially rolled back. With the sanctuary designation, it is a fairly robust process, starting with this consideration, moving into a formal recommendation, and ultimately into a Congress vote.
So we just passed the 1,000-meter mark. Our target depth is a little over 1,800 for starting our dive, so a little more than halfway down to the bottom. For those anxiously awaiting variation in our screen besides the beautiful blue.
It's a beautiful blue.
Front row, approximately how much longer do you think it'll be till we are seeing the seafloor?
25 minutes.
All right. Just enough time to go heat up your tea kettle, make yourself a nice cozy cup.
Kalameo, someone's wondering if you have a favorite coffee maker in Hawaii.
A favorite, like, what do you mean?
Like a brand of coffee or a type of coffee.
Whatever's in the cabinet.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we tried. I think I need to do better, but looking at more of our local coffee producers.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe that might be the best thing to do if we're in Hawaii, is to sort of support local. I know that Ko'u and Kona Coffee are pretty big in Hawaii, but like just maybe looking for those smaller, more like place-based, like coffee farms and stuff like that. I'm not too sure, but yeah, for now I'm gonna say whatever I get would be the best.
I second that emotion.
Yeah. I did just get the ins on a little bit of tech, the handheld espresso like machine thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I know what
That's next level.
I know what somebody in our household is getting for Christmas this year.
Spoilers.
Right.
Yeah, thanks for your questions. Thanks for tuning in from around the world. This is a fun time of day for our watch. We have a lot more viewers tuning in from North America, Europe, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, Israel, Turkey. Thanks for tuning in. Feel free to drop your questions in the chat. That chat feature is on nautiluslive.org. If you're watching on the YouTube channel, you can click on nautiluslive.org and look for the little green button. Drop your questions here. We're here to try our best and answer.
Is it correct that this is our 9th dive of this expedition series? That sound right? Started at 84?
92 minus
92?
84?
Okay.
Yeah. That would be, it's our 9th.
And this is just another reminder for our educators and our communities in Hawaii. Nautilus does offer these half-an-hour interactions, the ship-to-shore interactions, in which we sort of discuss the scientific goals as well as everything from the overall scientific goals to some of the daily operations on Nautilus and stuff. And so, if you or anyone in your community might be interested in how you might be able to get involved or or arrange one of these meetings, we'd ask you guys to go to nautiluslive.org and to book under the education tab to book a ship-to-shore interaction. Although we might be halfway through this expedition, we have another one coming up right after it, which is going to go from, I believe, December 8th until, sorry, what did they say? December 8th until
the 19th or 20th?
Yeah.
Yeah, if you are interested in one of those 30-minute ship-to-shore interactions, definitely get registered as soon as possible and make sure you get a confirmation. We're a little tight on available slots, especially for this expedition, but for the following expedition or for the follow-up, our third in this series will be back in Papahanaumokuakea in April. So definitely, if you are interested in talking with us directly, getting your questions answered, and actually seeing our faces, I encourage you to look under the education tab on nautiluslive.org for that. Although, yeah, like Kalameo said, if you are in Hawaii, the time zones may line up a little bit better for us. We might have especially afternoon availability. All right, folks wondering, what's the objective of this dive? What's the dive plan for today? People are ready to go.
Jeff, can you bring up HiPAC again on channel 3?
Actually, we've got MB Proc as well.
Okay.
If we want to do the flater mouse thing.
Let's do it.
All right, thank you. So in channel 3, or the lower left quad of, lower left screen of the quad, you can see our view in a software program that looks at our multi-beam mapping data. And so here you're seeing a view of some of the seamounts in the northern extent of the region that we've been diving in, although we've also been visiting many seamounts further south of here. So our dive target today is on the larger seamount that we're zooming in on right now, called Tamana Seamount. It's a flat-top guyot that at one point was above the sea surface. We're going to be targeting a little spur on the northeast side. What looks to be a relatively sharp ridge feature with some slump failures off to the both sides. So hopefully we'll see some exposed rocks and some interesting currents delivering food to what we hope to see, some interesting coral and sponge communities. So we're going to be starting at a depth of around a little deeper than 1,800 meters and working our way southeast as we rise up the ridge flank. Coming up to our end goal is roughly around 1,200 meters water depth. We won't get all the way up to that flat top area because our main objectives of this expedition are for looking at these deep sea coral and sponge communities, as well as looking at the rocks that those communities are attached to, for getting age and formation history of these seamounts in this region, as well as their alteration. So if we went all the way up to the top of the guyot, those rocks would be covered in carbonates from when this guyot was much closer to the sea surface. So that would kind of blur out our objectives. So unlikely that we'll crest the top of this guyot on today's dive, but you never know. Things could change. So today's dive is planned to be about a 12-hour journey. So we should be getting to the seafloor in a little less than 20 minutes to start this exploration together. So thanks for tuning in. And if you have other questions about this region, please send them in. And thanks, Rennie, for being our eye in the sky navigator on Flater Mouse.
Thank Aaron Heffron for setting that all up. Do you know if we plan on diving? It's a bit deep, but on this this ridge feature of the seamount?
I do not know. It's been a while since I've looked at the overall dive plan.
Yeah.
And I know that in our mapping, we've seen some features that weren't part of the original dive plan. So perhaps, but I don't know. Yeah, with all this new mapping and seeing these features for the first time, it definitely entices some changes to our dive plan, to our overall dive planning, to decide if we want to spend more time at some seamounts to understand how, for example, when we dove on the Don Quixote seamount, which is to the northwest of where we'll be diving today, which Rennie is pulling up. Yeah, great. So it's, again, another large flat top geo. We did a dive on this northern spur and saw some interesting diversity. Then we did a dive on the northwestern spur and saw much higher density of corals and sponges. And so that might change our decision-making process in terms of, do we want to try another spur and a different orientation to see how, you know, variations in current, sedimentation, oxygen, temperature, et cetera, all could be playing a role in where these communities are found. We come out here with a plan, but then that plan gets refined as we get more information. And down here at the southern end, we have done a dive on what you can see in Fledermaus is this ancient volcano that was not previously above the sea surface. It does not have a flat top. And we have an intention to maybe dive on a few other seamounts in this southern extension. But let's see what happens.
Just to speak briefly on the mapping you can see here, let me turn on this surface. That's kind of all we knew about this seamount from satellite altimetry before, let me just turn off the other one. Where's our, yeah, before we mapped it, that's what we knew.
Yeah.
Right there. And then we came in, we mapped, and it came up a bit shallower, and let me just turn this one back to the wireframe. Yeah, and you can see we got a lot more detail.
A lot more detail.
A lot more detail there, and that helps with dive planning, but also knowing a bit about geomorphology, about what actually occurred there, etc.
And Renato, what was the source of that sonar mapping? Was it the ship or Hercules?
This was the ship. So we have a hull-mounted multi-beam sonar system that we use kind of in tandem. Sometimes we have entire cruises that are focused on mapping. Other times we use it to inform our dives or in transit to dives. The prior cruise to this was mapping the Liliuokalani seamounts that were previously unmapped, and we anticipate diving on them in spring of next year.
How many different sonars do we have, or are we actively using on Nautilus?
Most often we're using our EM302 Kongsberg multi-beam sonar. It's a 30 kilohertz unit. And we also have a sub-bottom profiler that has a 3.5 kilohertz and 12 kilohertz component. And we have a lot of acoustic sensors and sonars on the vehicles themselves, but those are the frequency and power are more appropriate for local information. So really close to the vehicle, that's all we need that for. We do have a vehicle-mounted multi-beam sonar as well that we can map high-resolution maps of a particular plot of seafloor.
Rennie, can you explain the difference between multi-beam and a single beam?
Sure. See how much time we have. I'll try to plan it. So sonar in general, we have a source of sound that we're emitting an acoustic pulse. And in order to map the seafloor, that acoustic pulse travels through the water and reflects off of a surface, in this case the seafloor, and it returns, and we have a listening element or array in the case of multi-beam. So a single beam sonar, you emit a pulse, and it kind of starts as a single point source, and that pulse, as it propagates through the water, kind of is a very cone-like. You can think about a flashlight in the complete dark, or, you know, kind of, it's not a direct beam, although now LEDs are a bit better than that, but it kind of starts to spread out. So that cone, you think of your flashlight as, you know, a certain diameter aperture, and when it's against a wall that's far away, you see a giant circle. So think about that concept, but face it downward. And that's kind of what we're doing with sonar. So that's a single beam. What multi-beam does is really cool and complex. So let's take that concept of sound and think about a speaker that you have at home, a single speaker. And now if you've ever been to a large concert or seen a stage, think about that line of speakers that you have coming down.
Yeah.
So that's not just to look cool or project a lot of sound, but what happens is when you have an array in a vertical orientation like that, is you can actually beam form the wave. So you can change that big circle, and if you stack two speakers, one on top of each other, it kind of squinches that circle into more of an ellipse or an oval in the perpendicular direction to your array. So a long stretch of speakers like that will take a beam, it kind of creates a perpendicular horizontal beam and spreads that. So
it turns the sound into like a fan?
Yeah, kind of like a very thin ellipse. And so on bringing it back to the ship, we have our multi-beam array. So the transmit array is a linear array that goes along the ship, along the length of the ship, and creates a ellipse beam shape that is horizontal, facing downward. So now we have a transmission that allows for a very thin slice, but we need information about single points. So some crazy genius had the bright idea of taking a receive array and orienting it horizontal. So kind of a beam of the ship. And so now you can listen, the same concept of transmitting the sound, you can listen the same way. So now you're listening to a thin ellipse. And then you can, using the magic of acoustics, physics, and math and timing, you can steer those beams to listen to individual sections of that long horizontal transmit ellipse. And so that's how, when we're traveling along the sea surface, collecting data, we're sending a ping down and listening and getting a lot of points in a single swath. And as we move through space and time, we are covering more ground and collecting more and more data. So each one of those points is an XYZ space. So stack a bunch of those up together and normalize to a grid cell size. You can think about a camera pixel, something like that. And that's how you get kind of what you're seeing in front of you. That's a simplified version of that.
And under optimal conditions, what is the swath that can be mapped with our ship moving?
Yeah, let me see if I have it's going to depend on depth. So you can think about the angle from the surface down to the seafloor. As you get deeper, if you're shallow, your swath width is going to be, you know, limited to that triangle, the base of that triangle on the seafloor. So it's a few hundred meters width. But as you get deeper to a certain depth, it's wider and wider, and then at some point you start to lose the ability for that sound to travel back, so the swath kind of starts to come back. But in general, if we're as deep as we are now, we can see swath widths on either side of the ship, so of 3,000 meters, so a 6,000 meter total swath. So it's kind of crazy to be at the surface and we're mapping, we just see the ocean, but to think if you're looking on the port side directly out that we're mapping seafloor that's, you know, 3.5, 4 kilometers away.
Wow.
Thanks for that tutorial.
Sure. Looks like we got only a few more minutes.
Yeah, so we just passed the 1,600 meter mark. We've got maybe a little over 200 meters to go. Maybe a little shallower depending on where we settle out on this new ridge feature.
Picking it up in sub-bottom at all yet?
Nope.
It looked kind of crisp the other day, so I wonder if they messed with the gains or something. Find out. I think I know who's fiddling with it.
Yeah, and the question there, is there any type of sonar that can detect biomass under the deep sea so you can determine better dive locations?
Yes. So the multi-beam sonar itself can, not only are we collecting information about the seafloor, but we pick up returns in the water column as well. So we have a lot of data on what's in the water column. So can have an idea about where biomass is, depending on resolution and the frequency of the sonar, et cetera. There are some that are more capable of water column or water column specific mapping.
So getting kind of some hints, but there's really no replacement for bringing the ROVs down and getting eyes on the seafloor.
Well, the only potential replacement is putting in an autonomous vehicle that can also image, but those have limited sampling capabilities, so it'll just show you some imagery.
Your heading is like starting to go. Yeah.
Today's dive is number 1,892.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a lot of dives for Hercules.
Should be real.
Okay.
Thanks for tuning in. We have less than 100 meters here till the seafloor. Stay tuned. Keep your eyes peeled.
It should be real. I think it's just cranked down.
Messing with the gains.
Chairs make my legs fall asleep. And now I can spy on the front row better.
Those monitors push down too, and they sometimes float up.
It's okay.
Are we starting to see something in Argus?
Yeah, in Argus
Subfloor?
sub-bottom, we're seeing a return that kind of correlates with what our multi-beam bathymetry suggests. So we're cautiously approaching.
And for our viewers, that's what you're seeing in channel 3 there. See that brown line
Roger.
start to rise up.
Come to stop.
Yeah, it might be a little bit of a return. What's he facing? 90. Yeah. Unfortunately, you don't have Doppler, so I can't really help you there.
Now is a good time to start imagining what is the first animal we're going to see on the seafloor besides the tiny little plankton in the water.
Sometimes that's the edge of Argus as we approach the surface. It starts to turn into like the crisp square. It's weird, but it could also be feature, so it's a guessing game. Yeah. Right.
Lindsay, have any of the
Yeah, something like that.
video highlights from this current expedition been posted on the Nautilus YouTube or website?
You know, we've had a couple small clips, but we're having some syncing issues.
Okay.
So nothing very extensive yet.
Okay. Well, for folks who are joining us for the first time, you can check out those short clips at the Nautilus Live YouTube page or the Nautilus Live website. Get an idea of what we have been seeing, some of these coral communities and sponge communities. And stay tuned to see what today's dive looks like.
Yeah, I think those have mostly been going out through social media channels like Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, or Facebook and Instagram predominantly.
Okay.
Starting to see the glow there in HD. There you are.
We're starting to change our orientation of Hercules and Argus as we're approaching the seafloor. So as we come down, they're roughly parallel with one another. And now we're settling out to have Argus above Hercules. And for folks watching on the website, that view is in channel 2, or the upper right quad, if you're in quad view.
So that should be downslope there as you get to the bottom, but a relatively less steep slope. No returns in Herc sonar yet. Meso. Nope, no Doppler yet.
Water clarity seems a bit more turbid than previous dives.
Don't expect Doppler till I think 30 or something. Till we get our 600 back.
Yeah, and just a reminder for our audience, when we do reach the seafloor, once we're settled in a bit, we're going to take a moment. We'll be going off SPL and taking a moment to ground our team and the work we're about to do and acknowledge the biocultural resources in front of us. So that will be happening here in just a few minutes.
Lindsay, for our new viewers, what does SPL stand for?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. You are on. If you're listening to us, you are on our science party line.
There we go, seeing some more returns there. In,
SPL.
Argus. That tracks with the
I
orientation.
think it should be
around
SPT
45.
for science party time.
I'll get right on that.
I am sure you will.
actually has to do with the intercom system itself.
Okay,
We actually,
30
they
meters.
call it a party line.
party line.
So we have a programmed thing called a party line, and since this is the science party line, it's SPL.
Yeah.
So we do have
Got
other
bottom
PLs.
insight on bubble, it looks like.
Jeff, do you mind bringing up the Herc and Argus sonar views in channel 3?
25
So
meters
for our
off.
audience at home, you can see how using different bits of information to understand where the seafloor is
Starting to
in
get an
relation to our
HD there.
vehicles. Yep, and we're starting to see seafloor in the Hercules camp. Rennie, in the Herc view, what is the distance between each red circle?
Those are 10-meter divisions, and that's the right side of the screen, and the left side of the screen is Argus, and that's 20-meter divisions.
Thank you.
Gonna log on bottom. All right, I'll give you a quick Doppler fix there. Okay, you're good for auto XY if you need it.
Here we are, our first view of Tamana Seamount.
So as we're approaching the seafloor, pilots are spending some time getting all their settings correct for Hercules and Argus. And then once we're steady, then we will, as Lindsay mentioned, go off mic to observe protocol before we begin.
When you get a chance, if you could try that auto XY out just to make sure that our DVL's behaving. Oh yeah, the old trick. The old don't slam into the seafloor trick. Hit the button twice.
Oldest trick in the book.
Yep. Oh, it's the out. Yeah, the out you have to do on and off. All right. Reasonable. Come back up. There you go.
All right, did you guys want to do the...
We're ready for protocol whenever you are.
Roger. All right, we're ready up here.
Okay.
Great, thanks. So at this time, we'll be going radio silent and conducting a private ceremonial protocol that acknowledges and honors the biocultural resources that are present and that we'll be interacting with and impacting. So we'll be back on microphone shortly. This time I invite everyone in the control van to go ahead and mute your microphone.
For those interested in learning more about this observance of protocol in our work here, the expedition page on Nautilus Live for the Yymmdd expedition has a blog post about the names of this expedition and the connection to cultural practice. And as well on the, I believe, the Office of Hawaiian Affairs webpage, there's also more information about observance of cultural tradition, cultural protocol, and work in this area.
All right, and once again, getting our first view here, the first exploration site of Tamana Seamount.
At some point, Jess, can we get black and white balances?
So it looks like our landing depth is a little bit shallower than we were anticipating, but that's probably because we're on a slope. Depending on where the ship is and where we are. And so we can see in the view here some very big boulders, but not a lot of life yet. So, Rennie, do we want to put in a ship, do we want to put in a move southwest a little bit, and we'll start?
We will. We're just going to get set up here. We've got to do a white balance and a couple little getting set up on the seafloor things, and then we'll be ready for that.
Okay. Well, go ahead and take your time.
Sure.
And we'll enjoy the view in the meantime.
This is when Jeff gets to shine.
Jeff always shines.
I don't know how shiny this stuff is, but...
Will you walk us through what you're about to do, Jeff?
Yeah, sure. On the manipulator arm, on the right-hand side there, you'll see in a second here 3 pieces of colored tape and a big chunk of white. And so we're very concerned about making sure that what is white is truly white electronically. It helps to determine whether something is purple or pink or red. And so we just take a second here, turn the lights on, and we'll actually calibrate black. So you're going to see everything go dark here in a minute. And then you will see us go focus on the little white patch there. And actually, considering that, you know,
go ahead, Jeff.
Black first. It's thinking. It's thinking. There we go. Considering that we're basically in the same water, and we used this all last night, that's actually a pretty decent white, but we're still going to tell the camera that that's white. And that's that.
All right.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeff.
Do we do anything with the red, green, and blue?
I can actually kind of see that they're okay. They're
just in terms of saturation and stuff.
Yeah, saturation and whether yeah, it's a whole long thing.
Yeah.
And not only that, those are just pieces of electrical tape, not like special TV calibrated colors. So
yeah,
it's mostly to go, hey, look, we can see color.
Yeah, the distance between Herc's lasers are 10 centimeters. And there's a vote to see more of that purple Victor Gorgia, the purple coral.
if only we could vote to determine what we're going to see. That would be fun. Yeah, we'll keep our eyes out for that. And please, if you're following along, if you spot anything, these little lovely purple polyps, let us know. Sometimes we may overlook stuff as we've got a lot of things going on in the van at the same time.
Nice.
Yeah, if we could just stay here for a little bit, I'm going to sort this out.
Roger.
Jess, if possible, while we're sorting things out, to get some partial zooms of these 2 sponges in front of us on these boulders, that would be great.
Sure thing. Yeah, I'll keep this position for Rennie. He's working on the USBL, but I will. It's okay. It's going to be a little bit of a far shot. But
that's fine.
Go ahead, Jeff, and push on in on that sponge.
These polyopagons we're seeing already?
It's what it looks like to me, but I'm not an expert. And it looks like we're seeing several different generations of them, both some small ones as well as a larger one.
You want to come a little wide there, Jeff? We can look up to the top right.